There's a global debate raging at this time after the Indian government shot off notices to Twitter asking them to comply with Indian law. Remember, the Indian government had asked Twitter to deactivate accounts which were found to be posting inflammatory material about the farmer protest. Twitter then for a few hours did deactivate these accounts, but then brought them back, saying that they'd reviewed them internally and found no reason for these accounts to be blocked. Now, is Twitter just an intermediary? Can it play cop? Can it play court? Or must it listen to the laws of the government where it operates? This has become a massive case, not just in the national context, but also internationally. Here is our lead story tonight.
Off Delhi's borders, the farmer protest has been raging online too. But the misinformation and offensive content being posted on Twitter has the government of India seeing red. 24 hours after Modi government put the social media platform on notice, Twitter on Thursday suspended 2 accounts of Tractor to Twitter campaign for alleged objectionable content. This after it had blocked and then restored over 100 accounts that called for farmer genocide. The company said that the accounts and tweets were unwithheld in the name of free speech and news worth.
देखिए, कुछ लोग जो उपासना का चोला ओढ़ के वासना का काम कर रहे हैं, किसानों के आंदोलन को लेके या और देश में तमाम इससे पहले सीएए हुआ, तो ऐसे लोगों से सावधान रहने के लिए ये इंटेलिजेंस का एक अपना नेटवर्क है, तो उसको जो भी उचित हो वो कार्रवाई करनी चाहिए.
The government on Wednesday had threatened penal action against the microblogging platform if it failed to block handles spreading misinformation claiming farmer genocide. Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has warned of slapping sections of IT Act which could result in up to 7 years jail for Twitter India officials and a financial penalty for the company. Centre's 5-page notice is strongly worded and says that hashtag on genocide was posted on Twitter with the design to inflame passions, hatred and misinformation. The government in the notice said that incitement to genocide is not freedom of speech, it is a threat to law and order. The government goes on to state that Twitter unilaterally blocked accounts and tweets despite its 31st January order for blocking. Twitter had replied to the ministry on February 1, declining to abide by and obey the order issued by the government.
देश देख रहा है, दुनिया देख रहा है, आप अलग अलग तरीके से दबाव बनाने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं, बोलने की आज़ादी खत्म करना चाहते हैं. हमें लगता है ये सारी चीजें लोकतंत्र में ठीक नहीं.
इसमें विदेशी ताकतों को कौन प्रेरित कर रहा है, क्या कर रहा है, यदि आपकी नीतियां ऐसी हैं और उसके ऊपर कोई प्रतिक्रिया देते हैं और आपकी छवि विदेशों में भी अगर खराब हो रही है, तो उसमें आंदोलन को दोष देने की आवश्यकता नहीं है.
Government has now read out the rule book to Twitter, saying it is an intermediary and obliged to obey the direction of the government. Is Twitter then liable as an intermediary, and could it be in bigger trouble ahead? Bureau Report, India Today.
So if there is a dispute over content posted on a social media platform, whose will prevails? The will of a social media giant based out of California, which has its own rules and regulations, or the law and the will of the Indian government and law enforcement agencies? This is a crucial question, and as I said, it's not just being followed here, it's also being tracked very widely internationally, because it can then become a precedent globally for hopefully a nuanced conversation on different aspects of this fight between the Indian government and Twitter. I'm joined on this broadcast by Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament, National Spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Squaring off against Rajiv, we have Madhu Gaudyashki of the Congress Party. For a perspective on how internet freedom advocates view this fight, I have Raman Chima. Raman is the chairperson of the Internet Freedom Foundation and the Asia Policy Director and Senior International Counsel at Access Now. We have Pawan Duggal, one of India's best known cyber law activist and Supreme Court advocate, has really seen the whole cyber law domain in this country. Last but not least, we have Prerna Kaul Mishra. She is the managing editor for social media and content at the India Today Group. I want to go across first and foremost to Rajiv Chandrasekhar to set the premise for what the BJP government is trying to do, because this is an international landmine. It's an international precedent as well. You're essentially telling Twitter, and you understand the tech domain really well, Mr. Chandrasekhar, that you have to listen to Indian law and the Indian government. If you don't, you've gone to the extent of saying that we will arrest Twitter executives in India. Explain why you believe that the Indian government has the right to do what you want, and why you believe this is not wrong in national and international law. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, let's start the debate with you.
Yeah, so Rahul, thank you for having me. And let me just give you a little bit of a backstory. This is an issue, the issue of regulating these big tech intermediaries is an issue that people like me have been raising for several years now. And obviously this has come to a boil at this stage, and the government is taking action. So let me just set that up, say that before I respond to you further. Look, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, or in the government's mind, or anybody's mind for that matter, that any of these companies, big tech, whether they're Twitter, Facebook, any of these large companies that dominate the internet today, their guidelines or whatever their ways of operating must be consistent with Indian law. And under Indian law, there are two specific issues, specific areas that govern them. One is the whole issue of Article 19(1)(a), which gives the freedom of expression. And then there is Article 19(2) that places some restrictions on that freedom of expression. And then there is Section 69 of the IT Act, which says that the government has the right to direct these intermediaries, as they call themselves. They are no longer intermediaries, they are full-blown platforms that are quasi-publishers. That the government has the right to cause them to take down content in the national security interest and public order. Now, for a long time, these platforms have escaped regulation because of the safe harbor under Section 69 and Section 79, saying that, look, we are not responsible for what gets published on our platforms, and therefore we can't be held responsible for it. I think the world at large, and India in particular, have begun to realize that big tech represents a real problem, and it can easily incite, it can easily spread fake news and lies, and therefore there is a need to regulate them. In the absence of any other legislation, this is the government is using the IT Act and Section 69 to direct them to take down, shut down accounts under the public law and order. And I think this is the way things will go. There is an argument that we will need better legislation and better regulations going forward. But the fact that governments have the right to intervene and direct intermediaries to comply with Indian law should be completely non-controversial.
Okay, so I want to spend a moment explaining to our viewers what Section 69A of the Information Technology Act 2000 is about. This has powers to issue directions for blocking for public access of any information through any computer resource where the central government or its officer, specially authorized by it, is satisfied that it is necessary to do so in the interest of sovereignty and integrity and defense of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, or public order, or for preventing incitement to the commission of any cognizable offense relating to these matters. So I want to go across to Raman Chima. This is the act that the government is citing, saying that, under Section 69A of the IT Act 2000, you have to comply with our regulations. You don't have an option, and if you don't, we will come and arrest whatever Twitter executives are based out of India. There aren't too many, but there are a few, and the government is now threatening to arrest them. Why is it, Raman Chima, that you think that this is a fundamentally bad idea?
The important thing for us to remember in this conversation, Rahul, is where do we want to see Indian democracy go, and what's the tradition from which we're coming from? So as you mentioned, the ultimate authority in India is not even the government, it's the people of India and it's the Constitution of India. The government has to operate within the Constitution, including the fundamental rights given to Indian citizens. And whatever actions it takes, including actions under laws passed by Parliament, have to respect that. And if those actions don't respect that, or those laws don't respect that, they're taken down. In fact, I remember a case from several years ago. You may remember the Shreya Singhal judgment, where 66A of the IT Act was struck down. And Section 69A was also, in fact, reviewed in that case. Mr. Chandrasekhar was a petitioner in that matter when he was an independent MP. And what the court said was, we're leaving Section 69 there because the government, 69A there, pardon me, because the government can occasionally require content to be blocked if it follows proper process and if it is not crossing its lines. And my strong view in this case is it's crossing its lines, because a situation where orders are being published to remove content from social media, those orders themselves are not made public, they're secret. The government doesn't explain how it came about that, who are the members of the committees that did this, that it followed proper process, or how it found it legitimate to block the online handles and presence of real world news organizations and websites. Because the simple question I'd ask you is, do we want an India where press, or let's take a specific example, the Caravan magazine will be blocked online? How is that different from direct censorship? And ultimately, this is what companies like Twitter have to respect. I acknowledge Mr. Chandrasekhar's very valid concerns about big tech and the power they have there. Big tech should not be an excuse for also big bad government. And in this particular case, we have to go into the question about, is Twitter doing its proper job? Because multinational corporations like it also are accountable to human rights practices, including UN governing principles on business and human rights.
So Rajiv Chandrasekhar spoke of big tech.
Order, push back.
Chima counters with big bad government. And I want to go across to Pawan Duggal for his take on this, because Section 69(3) of the Information Technology Act speaks of an intermediary who fails to comply with the direction issued under these sections shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend up to 7 years and shall be liable to fine. So basically, these Twitter executives, and that will create international headlines if it does, and the government currently is definitely pushing hard and warning them that if they don't, this is what will happen, that these Twitter executives could end up in jail for 7 years. Is this really big tech versus big government? Are there, how do you view the entire spectrum of issues involved over here? Can the government, you believe, rightfully jail Twitter executives if they fail to comply with its order? Pawan Duggal.
I think the issue is completely different. The issue is, can an intermediary operate in India by taking the benefit of its market, but yet choose not to comply with its law? That's the issue. The government is very clear. Now that the Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal's case has actually upheld Section 69A of the IT Act, the fact remains is this is now the fait accompli. Till such time, the law does not change. Now, if as an intermediary, Twitter has got some problem with the blocking order, it has got its legal recourse remedies available. It can file appropriate appeals under the IT Act. It can also potentially go to the writ courts. And ultimately, this matter will have to be adjudicated by courts, because the issue is that we've been seeing for the last many, many years, the law has been having a very, very soft-handed approach on intermediaries. And consequently, after Shreya Singhal, most of the intermediaries have misinterpreted Shreya Singhal's judgment by saying, sir, the Supreme Court asks us to be spectators, we will be spectators. We will do nothing till such time we either get a court order or an order from a governmental agency to remove or disable any kind of a content. Now, if that is the stated position, and if the government gives you an order, rightly or wrongly, to either remove or block certain content, then clearly you have an option to either comply with it, or if you're aggrieved by it, to go ahead and legally challenge. But you cannot say that I will act as a judge on top of the governmental decision, primarily because this is what Supreme Court does not want you to do in Shreya Singhal's case. The Supreme Court does not want intermediaries to be mere judges. And once they are now determining that this is a matter of free speech versus is the government right or not right, I think we are actually going into very transient times. These are testing times, and what is going to be now tested is how much of the political will is going to get translated in effective enforcement of the Indian cyber law vis-a-vis the role of intermediaries in India.
So you've shaped this. So you've shaped this well. You say that this is between these tech companies playing spectator or judge. The Supreme Court has so far ruled that you are spectators, but when you get an order, you have to comply with it, and therefore Madhu Gauri Ashki, the likes of Pawan Duggal and Rajiv Chandrasekhar argue that at this moment, the law as it stands is that these intermediaries, these tech platforms have to comply with government laws. They can't say, yeah, we've seen what you're saying, we don't like what you're saying, and we'll disagree with it. So why do you believe what the BJP is trying to do is so wrong? Madhu Govt.
It's a completely not only wrong, it is unconstitutional, Rahul. What is the Honorable Supreme Court has said it when somebody went to strike down this Section 69A. Even these social media platforms, nothing but it amount to be curtailing this freedom of expression through the social media is nothing but an amount of curtailing freedom of expression. Secondly, what is the basic fundamental principles of democracy? The government should act for the people, of the people, by the people. What is the government is doing now here? The so-called social media platforms, Rahul, the government of India gave the list of people to be blocked, their Twitter accounts. Twitter went on blocking them, found no evidence, and they unblocked it. What is the government trying to do it here? I'm glad my friend Rajesh Chandrasekhar ji was one of the proponents of liberalizing the telecommunication system. He himself was contributing to liberalizing the privatization of the telecommunication system. Now we are using these internet-based platforms where people are expressing their views and their. Let me share here one of the tweet by the Honorable Prime Minister when he can use tweet about those recent violent acts at Washington, D.C. That violence in Washington, D.C., orderly and the peaceful transfer of power must.
Okay, so here's the point you're making, and I want Rajiv Chandrasekhar to respond to this, that if somebody were to say something which the government finds unpalatable, then the government can simply ask for this to be shut down. This is not a Supreme Court order or even a High Court order which has looked at the evidence that the government has presented and come to the conclusion that this is not acceptable for public consumption. This is what the government of the day, which is your party, finds unacceptable, which could be any criticism of the government, which you could then, if this becomes the precedent, start shutting down. This could be reportage you don't like, this could be opinions you don't like, this could be anything. Basically the government says, no, I don't like it, shut down this account. That's it. Deny them the right to speak. Mr. Chandrasekhar.
Let me first respond to my colleague from the Congress, Madhu. I just want to gently remind him that the political party, and I don't want to necessarily get into a tutu because this is a good topic to discuss, that the first political party that came out and put restraints on free speech on the internet was the Congress with Section 66A of the IT Act, which was passed in Parliament with 1 minute discussion and then left unresolved by ministers one after the other till people like us went to the Supreme Court. So I just wanted to give that backstory so that Madhu is aware of that. He doesn't seem to be aware of that. The issue here is
aware of that, Rahul, now you're other side now. That time you're asking for.
No, Rahul, let me explain to you.
Are using the same
construct. I don't disagree with Mr. Chima that we need to discuss what kind of an India we want. The way India we want is already prescribed in the Constitution, and Article 19(2) already says that the government has the right to place fetters on the right to free speech. It's prescribed in the Constitution. What Mr. Duggal says is absolutely right. If Twitter or Facebook or any platform has a problem with a government's order and they believe the government's order is going beyond 19(2) and beyond 69's reasonableness, they can go to court. This matter will be adjudicated. So there is no need for anybody to worry about this narrative of this draconian power of the government, and the government will say no to Rahul Kanwal one day, no to somebody else someday. All of this is adjudicatable. Every action of the government under the IT Act is adjudicatable in courts, as Mr. Duggal said. But we must understand the government has the right, was guaranteed the right in the Constitution. Section 69 gives the government the right to intervene when they believe intermediaries need to take down content. And that is a sovereign right for this government.
No.
And that is not something that Twitter or Facebook can laugh away and say, no, 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 we don't like the quality or complexion of the order that you're passing, and therefore we will not take it down. They should take it down and go on appeal to the courts if they don't like the order. That's the way to do this. Be respectful of Indian law, not dismissive of Indian.
How are other countries, Prerna Mishra, how are other countries grappling with this issue? What happens if Twitter just turns around and says that, you know, we won't follow this law, we don't accept it, we don't buy what you're saying, we think these tweets are fine. You know, similar situations would be happening in other countries as well. So what's the international precedent and how are other countries looking at it?
Rahul, other countries have taken this very, very seriously, and we know that you know, the European Union and the European countries are working towards a you know, a very stringent law for these platforms, and there have been lots of you know, parliamentary interventions into the powers of these platforms, which are almost becoming a law unto themselves. So, you know, while we have done a lot of discussion on the legality of whether this should have been done or not, I would want to kind of bring the conversation a little back to why it was done. You know, it was a hashtag, Modi planning farmer genocide, which is more a sentence than a hashtag, which is very provocative, which is very indicative, which is in a way a sentence of hate speech, right? So if you look at this whole controversy from the content and the perspective, so it's a case-by-case study that we'll have to take this at. It's not a one-size-fit-all kind of a situation. In this particular case, the government actually intervened because this hashtag was used by even some of the mainstream media properties, and it was almost a fake narrative. Right? So it isn't so much clamping down on the freedom of the press as it is clamping down on the fake narrative, which something like Modi planning farmer genocide connotes in the first place, right? The second point that I would want to kind of point you, the esteemed panel to, is when Twitter responded, their response said the stock phrases and exaggerations, crude emotional appeals do not constitute inflammatory speech. Now, I have a conflict with that statement as well, because if that is not inflammatory speech, then what is inflammatory speech and who decides that? Is it Twitter who's going to decide what is inflammatory speech in a situation that India or Delhi is at the moment, which is really sitting on the sword's edge? You know, it's one day it falls this side, the other day it falls the other side. There is so much polarization. There is so much of unrest in the public discourse. When something like this is happening in a country, what stops the country's law and order situation to slap or clamp up any platform which is operating on the soil of that country?
Okay,
which is
so Raman Chima, here's the point. Let's assume for a second, God forbid, any of these hashtags, and we've seen with several WhatsApp posts in Bengaluru, we saw they created real migration of people from the northeast because there was real panic around. It wasn't just make-believe social media Twitter storm. It was actual panic where people physically started getting into buses, getting on the roads, getting into trains and heading towards the northeast. It happened in Bengaluru. So who takes the responsibility for this? If Twitter just turns around and says, I don't like what the government is saying, I don't agree with you, can Twitter really play judge? Because then if something goes wrong, and it could, God forbid, happen, who takes responsibility for that?
See, the thing I think we have to understand, Rahul, is not about responsibility. It's about what's acceptable under the Constitution and what we want to see happen. Bangalore is a great example. I remember Mr. Chandrasekhar and many others intervened on that important issue. And the lesson from Bangalore was not to block content, was to make valid information possible. If you've seen repeatedly after that, Bangalore authorities have regularly made information available through social media, through news media, and physical presence at locations. That's what you see, not censorship. In fact, when Prerna mentioned that mere discussion about worries about genocide, no matter what perception you may have about that, itself is hate speech. I have to say, it's unfortunate. I don't think any international or public international lawyer would support her on that, because by that logic, what the Myanmar military has been doing in Rakhine and Chin, which they believe is national security operations, which other parts of the world are treating as armed attacks or genocide would be hate speech, which nobody agrees with. But more importantly, in this particular situation, let's look at the laws that are used. Mr. Chandrasekhar validly brought up that we opposed 66A when it was passed. He's right that all those amendments were passed within 1 minute. Guess which other provision was passed? Section 69A. It was passed within that 1 minute with no debate. In 2011, when the rules were issued, which his government is now choosing to say justifies them making these orders secret. Remember, you and I have not seen the actual orders. They're sealed. The government refuses to make them available. It was criticized by MPs as being incorrect, unconstitutional, and excessive. And the reality is today, if you think that censorship will help combat disagreement or other issues on the ground, that's a separate discussion. The ultimate reality is, do you think that this is acceptable that in 21st century India, the government is censoring the social media profiles of news magazines, of journalists? And I would say that's not what's acceptable, and we must reiterate and understand.
Okay, let Rajiv Chandrasekhar respond to this, because this is a secret hidden order. No one has seen what it is. This isn't by a court. We don't know why you've come to this conclusion, and therefore how can you expect everyone to just fall in line and say yes sir?
So Rahul, I just Raman and I have worked on things before, so I appreciate what he's saying, but the fact is, a fake news or an insightful piece of content has a velocity that cannot be addressed by simply rebuttal. The information flies so fast, and by the time the truth comes out, the damage is done. So therefore, this thing that we should not have internet takedowns and we will be like Burma, I just want to point out to him that in 2011, when there were riots in London, the UK government took down the internet. This is not something unique to what the Indian government
do so, but it didn't do so.
When faced with serious, insightful content, it is the sovereign right of any government to intervene and direct an intermediary to take down that hateful content. And if the intermediary chooses not to do so, it is then disrespecting and in being violating Indian law, as your colleague from India Today, the lady, pointed out. There should be ambiguity about respecting Indian law. Chief Raman is saying, let's have a debate about whether the law is right or wrong. That is a separate debate. We can have a debate on how to improve the law. But when the law is the law today, nobody can turn around and say, no, but I'm headquartered in Santa Clara, USA. I choose not to obey the Indian law. That, unfortunately, is not an option available to Twitter or Facebook or anybody.
No, but Pawan Dugal, there are two different things here. Pawan Dugal, there are two different things here. One is asking an intermediary platform to take down a certain post. That, like Kangana's post was taken down, she called farmers terrorists, that was found wrong, it was taken down. So that is one level of action. The other level of action, which is what the government asked for, is that you block these accounts, you take away their right to express themselves. Now that's a completely different ask, because taking down one post, many people are watching are saying, okay, if there's something which looks inflammatory, which uses a hashtag, which is incendiary, you shut that post down like you shut down Kangana Ranaut today. However, if this asks for more, if it asks for that person to be permanently silenced on Twitter, then how is that acceptable? Why should that be acceptable, or should it be restricted to the particular post that is found objectionable?
I think there's a lot of merit in what you are saying, Rahul, primarily because if at all somebody has tweeted something which is objectionable, only that is something that needs to be put down or blocked, not the entire content of the entire account, because at stake is his fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. Of course, the reasonable restrictions under Article 19(2) of the Constitution shall definitely prevail. But I think in a scenario like this, what's the learning that's coming across is there is lack of appropriate transparency and accountability in the checks and balances measures vis-a-vis Section 69A of the IT Act. And I think one of the learnings of this particular episode will be that not only will this law will have to be amended to make way for far more transparent formula or illustrations of how these broad-ranging terms of sovereignty, security, and integrity of India will have to be interpreted, but more significantly, what's also coming forward is that these kinds of powers under Section 69A, in case if they are going to be misused, what are going to be the appropriate mechanisms to prevent such an exercise? So I think
okay, so let Rajiv Chandrasekhar respond to that, because this whole idea about the lack of transparency and accountability in checks and balances, and that you can shut down a post if it's inflammatory, if it uses a hashtag that Modi is planning a genocide and that's not okay, shut that down. But can you deny, for example, to Caravan magazine, even if you don't like its reportage, the right to express themselves and to do stories? Because when you say shut this account down, then that's shut and silenced forever.
No. So I agree that not liking a point of view is no argument to shut down anybody. So we are on the same page on that. But being part of a concerted conspiratorial effort to propagate a false narrative, where you are part of a larger group of people working very hard to propagate a line that there is genocide on farmers, that is criminal. Rahul, we are not talking about something very simple. This is criminal activity that is designed to incite people and create violence at the end of that. So therefore, in my opinion, the government is fully within its rights to say, take down these handles. They are inciting violence. They are going to cause violence and loss of life. This is a legitimate assessment by the Government of India, the Ministry of Home Affairs, and therefore take them down. And Twitter, by the way, has absolutely no option today to turn around and say, no, we will not respect Indian law. We will not do this. They have to do this. They can then go and get it adjudicated in a higher court. No problem. But to the separate point that you raised about the bill requiring some
but the reality also is no.
Yes. Go ahead.
Sure, but the reality also is, Madhu Gaudyashki, if you see the manner in which sedition cases are being filed left, right and centre, many for just somebody putting out a tweet which may be factually incorrect and something the government disagrees with, but to charge that with sedition, that's an anti-national activity. Next you will be saying shut this person down as well. So how do we find this balance between obviously ensuring that there is no riot, but not muting and silencing those the government doesn't agree with? Because right now they don't tell you what their objections are and why they're asking for a certain appeal. There is no court interference in this. It's not a court decision. It's just an executive act on the part of the government. How and where do we find a balance till we wait for the law to be resolved and firmed up better? Madhu Yash.
Rahul, this exactly. I would like to remind my friend Rajivji. He was quoting about the sovereign power of the government. But that sovereign power can be used, not abused, only in case of national security. Where is the national security violated or endangered now? Secondly, Rahul, what you said it just now, filing a sedition cases on a simple one mistake tweet is nothing but an abuse of power, the absolute power which this government enjoys. And secondly, is it not curtailing? Rajiv just said it. He is the one when UPA government trying to bring in 69A, he is the one who went to the court. But now he is defending from the BJP government what is his party government, what is they're doing it now. Curtailing the freedom of press here, filing on social activists and other members on filing a sedition cases. These farmers, why this situation has arisen, first of all. Over 60 days, these farmers are protesting peacefully. It is the BJP supporters who are indulged into, with the support of the government. The government can't they find their main supporter, the Singha, who was mastermind behind this Red Fort Act, Red Fort incident. And secondly, now they're awarding the cash reward on them, which is nothing but the government. Whatever happened at the Red Fort, with the support of the government, they've done it. And filing a sedition cases on this social activists and some of the media, including your own media channel anchor, nothing but scuttling the freedom of expression, freedom of press.
Okay, so I think what we've been able to do in the last half hour is touch upon different dimensions of this very, very complex issue. There are no clear answers. The threat of posts leading to inflamed passions and possible riots is a real fear. The fear of the government wanting to silence voices it doesn't like because they're inconvenient is also a real fear. Who gets to play judge and jury? Will it be Twitter? Are they even competent to play judge and jury? Will it be a court? Will it be the government, which will have its own interests very naturally? Is a matter that needs to be thought about very deeply. I'm glad that we've been able to touch upon different perspectives. I want to thank all our guests for joining us. We will keep tracking this story